Good evening, everyone. My name's John Davis. I am director of the Strand Group, and this is our 77th event and the last one of this academic year. So nice to see so many of you, including so many current and former students. Always welcome. As you know, my introductions are usually brief, and tonight is no exception. With a lecture entitled Growth, Innovation and the Future of the Media, it is my very great pleasure to introduce Lord Grade of Yarmouth.
Thank you very, very much. That's a much better introduction than Bruce Forsyth gave me once. He said, and now, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Grade, a self-made man, who else would bother? Well, that was, which is equally brief, but so good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm not sure if this is the overflow from the Mansion House speech tonight, or whether you've come to hear what I've got to say. But thank you all for coming, and thank you, Strand Group, for giving me this opportunity to offer you some thoughts from the communications, with my role as chair of Ofcom, the communications regulator, which has a pretty wide brief. So I'll try and cover quite a bit of the field this evening. I'd like to start by taking you back to the early 90s, which doesn't seem that long ago to me, but to you, that's the olden days. Back then, it should be said, I was very skeptical of regulators. The country had gained rather a lot of them. Free market economics were in vogue, and watchdogs were needed to keep privatized sectors in check. But in my experience working in the creative world, in broadcasting, these were people with whom one often engaged in wearisome hand-to-hand combat rather than the light touch of regulation. How well I remember one meeting at the Independent Broadcasting Authority, obviously the TV regulator, where they demanded that ITV cancel our most popular programme, the soap opera Crossroads. The explanation, they were pressed for an explanation of why they wanted us to cancel this particular show, which was hugely the most popular show in Britain. And the chair of the IBA, Lady Bridget Plowden, replied for the minutes, I quote her verbatim, "The authority finds it distressingly popular." I kid you not, that actually happened. Now, the need for regulation in modern times was brought home to me very tellingly in a meeting I once had as chief executive of Channel 4. That was taking a meeting with Sir Peter Hall, the late Sir Peter Hall, the great director of theatre, opera and film, and former head of the National Theatre. He was pitching to me a TV adaptation of Sacred Hunger, the novel, the great novel by Barry Unsworth, which describes the cruelty and horror of the transatlantic slave ships in the 18th century. The book is truly exceptional, but the subject I felt had been rather well explored over the years in documentaries and other dramas. So I asked Peter how this story should speak to an audience today and to their concerns today. Why was it relevant? "Michael," he replied, "you have to understand, in a free market, without regulation, you ultimately end up trading human beings as a commodity." Now that's stuck with me ever since. Never forgotten his words. Without good regulation, markets risk running wild, with detriment to competition, detriment to consumers, and so on. And good regulation means being fit for the times. I can promise you that the Ofcom that I joined as chair 3 and a bit years ago, which is some 30 years later than my experience at the IBA, is galaxies away from those dark days of regulation. The regulation in those days seemed to be like nanny, whatever you're doing, stop it. Ofcom, I would say, as objectively as I know how, is a very modern regulator. What does that actually mean today? Well, that's, I think, a question that every regulator should be ready to answer. With the country demanding and needing growth, public finances under constant pressure, each public body must prove its value. Ofcom must be able to articulate the difference we make and the merits of our approach. I believe a modern regulator must do three things. It must engage, it must enable, and it must evolve. I'll explain a bit more in turn. To begin with, we need regulators that play an active role, directing their means to the broader good and showing leadership where they can. There is still enough in the traditional role of enforcing a set of rules, but to enforce is no longer enough. It is necessary also to enable. And I think this is quite a modern and quite a recent development in our attitude to regulators. That's why regulators should enable economic growth and competition. At Ofcom, we do that through our telecoms work. We've created an investment climate that is supporting the fastest rollout of full fibre broadband in Europe. We're doing it by allocating airwaves to groundbreaking services, from climate monitoring to giving your smartphone a signal from space. And we're doing it in broadcast. Next week, we will publish our review of public service media, that essential pillar of our hugely successful creative economy in this country, where the talent creation, export potential, and soft power are the envy of the world. More of that in a moment. We also support growth by deregulating, a key word in Ofcom. Where can we deregulate? We agonize at board meetings and strategy days and at the senior management team and so on. We're always, where can we deregulate? Why are we doing, we're always questioning why we're still doing stuff. Over time, we've lifted outdated rules around phone boxes and faxes. Remember those? Remember phone boxes? No, you're too young. And we've given more room to commercial radio to broadcast programs that appeal to their audiences today, rather than being held to legacy commitments from an analog age. Enablement works in other ways too. It might mean working with companies to establish what works for them and then creating the guidance that captures the best of what industry is doing and wants to do. That's increasingly necessary because if the rules and laws that give regulators their powers are too prescriptive, they risk becoming quickly outdated. We see that every day. Take our mission to make websites and apps safer under the Online Safety Act. This is a new act. The act sets broad duties on tech firms and establishes a framework for tackling specific harms. Ofcom then develops the codes and guidance that allow companies to comply. But these are not compulsory because Parliament recognised that the online world is rapidly evolving. So companies can comply in different ways, but our codes provide a clear path to avoid breaches, penalties, and harm. Of course, if firms fall short, enforce we certainly will. But in all our work, enable we must. Second, a modern regulator needs to engage and face outwards. They must be present, accountable, transparent, and fully conversant with Parliament, the public, civil society, and business, not just in the UK, but these days, particularly in our case, overseas too. Ofcom has always consulted on its decisions, but today our audience is bigger than ever before. We are completely transparent in our decision making, explaining our decisions in detail, our decisions, our judgments. We make our data available for companies and academics to harness and explore. Engagement also means, of course, being accountable. Our independence from government as a regulator is sacrosanct, especially as required from time to time to adjudicate on politically sensitive matters, particularly in broadcasting. But we are accountable to the parliaments and assemblies, where interest in our work has never been greater. This summer alone, we've given evidence to 7 select committees across the UK nations. We see that as a vital responsibility. We also welcome scrutiny from the courts. Well, we don't welcome it, but we get it, whether we want it or not. The General Counsel's here sitting in the front row, and I'm not sure whether he's smiling or crying, but we are regularly called to account through appeals in the court. And Ofcom sectors, like so many, are global in nature. So must our engagement be. For a long time, we've led the debate among European counterparts about how best to regulate a market like telecoms. We coordinate how airwaves are used at international conventions, the spectrum that we use for so many things today. We deal with US tech and content giants. Now we're a founding member of a global network of online safety regulators, aiming as far as possible to achieve some harmony and consistency in rules applying to services the world over. Imagine you're a tech company and you've got a different set of regulations in different territories all over the world in your markets. We're doing our best to lead as much harmonization as is possible. Third, and perhaps most importantly of all, modern regulators simply must evolve. So great is the pace of change, so diverse are people's modern needs, so complex are the markets where they engage, that expert bodies need to be super fit, agile and adaptive just to keep pace. Even I'm trying to lose weight. That's why Ofcom is investing in data, digital and AI tools that allow us to remain efficient and effective in the coming years. We're trialing more than a dozen techniques for improving our productivity and efficiency, from analyzing large data sets in our consultations to optimizing our management of the UK's airwaves, the spectrum. Our policy team devotes much time, really important, to horizon scanning for future needs. And that horizon is pretty close these days. We're learning too, by conducting and commissioning research on everything from consumer behavior to emerging tech. We aim to lead the debate and inform our own decisions and keep up to date with what's happening in the market and what is likely to happen around the corner. Efficiency, of course, is paramount. Our funding comes from the companies we regulate, many of whom operate in pretty challenging environments. So we must treat every penny with respect. And over the past decade, except where we've been asked to take on new duties and expand our duties, our budgets and our fees have largely remained flat. The real terms cost to industry of our regulation has fallen, therefore, significantly. And because of the fees and penalties we collect, Ofcom is a net contributor to the public purse, although we're not in business to raise money, we're in business to regulate. Those are just some examples of how we seek to enable, engage, and evolve. That last imperative will be familiar, I'm sure, to everyone here. At times, it might feel like we're facing into a hurricane of technological and societal change. Anyone who attempts to stand still risks being blown backwards. And nowhere is the pace of change greater than the online world. Here, 30 years after Peter Hall's warning, we see the consequences of a market left to develop without regulation. In the rush to create a cybersphere of networks and tools that promise to transform our lives, from search to social media, the founders of this new world placed a premium on revenue growth, but they failed to give enough attention to safety. Society has been slow to catch up, and the result is a virtual space where children are routinely approached by strangers, where they're exposed to content encouraging them to self-harm and end their lives, where they find themselves a click away from pornography, often more violent or extreme than anything previous generations might have encountered. Why has it taken regulation to get the tech sector finally to address the harms that they themselves allowed to happen in that wild west of unregulated social media? Speaking personally, I don't know how they sleep at night, reading the stories of what happens in that corner of the internet. Maybe they just count the clicks. No one, least of all the tech sector, should be surprised that a situation like this has brought about a societal, political, regulatory, and global reaction. But it has, and now change at last is happening. Just next week, a range of measures from Ofcom designed to protect children online will come into force. We've set out more than 40 practical steps that tech firms should take. At the moment, children's main path to harm is the content served to them on social feeds. So companies will need to change their algorithms so they don't promote damaging material. They must have the right teams and resources in place to take swift action when dangerous content is posted. And they must use strong, effective age checks to ensure that minors don't encounter material totally unsuitable for them. That includes pornography sites, and if firms don't comply by next Friday, we will be ready to take enforcement action. Earlier this year, duties came into force protecting all online users from illegal harm. Tech services now need to carry out proper risk assessments. They should be taking steps to remove criminal content quickly and reduce the risk of it appearing in the first place. I'm afraid at Ofcom we have already identified some firms who've not got their house in order yet. So we have launched around a dozen investigations already, and these could result in fines. In very serious cases, we may apply to the courts to stop a service being available in the UK as the Act allows. At which point, many in this room even, might ask, has this all become rather Orwellian? Whatever happened to freedom of expression, to free speech? When the Online Safety Bill was going through Parliament, there was a fulsome debate about how far regulations should go. In the end, plans to protect adults from content that was legal but harmful in the original draft of the bill were finally removed. So today, as the online safety regulator, Ofcom is specifically doing two things. We're tackling criminal material, such as terrorist content or child sexual abuse, and we're getting the tech companies to protect children both from the illegal and from content that poses serious risks of harm to their physical or emotional well-being. Now, if anyone believes that either of those aims is misguided, I'm afraid I cannot possibly agree. Neither one, to my mind, is in conflict with freedom of expression. Because as the historian Farah Diabla put it, freedom of speech is, and I quote, speech without wrongful interference. It is not speech without rules. Nor, I would add, is it speech without regard to the laws of the land. Yet it's never been more important. Freedom of expression remains the lifeblood of our democracy and the beating heart of Ofcom's regulation. To illustrate the point, I work in TV and radio, where last year we assessed almost 10,000 pieces of content which were either we spotted or were complained about. Each time, as required by law, we took full account of freedom of expression. We reflected the editorial discretion of broadcasters, and we observed viewers' and listeners' rights to receive a range of information and ideas. In the final analysis, out of those 10,000 pieces of content, only 33 cases breached our rules on the evidence that we uncovered. Did we also take account of the right not to be offended? Actually, no, because no such right exists. Offences, I'm afraid, is the risk that comes with the freedom to say what we think. Happily, the days of overbearing broadcast regulation are far behind us. Young theatregoers today might be shocked to learn that in my young lifetime, my family was in the theatre business, entertainment business, the Lord Chamberlain's censorship pencil hung dagger-like over every script before it could be produced in the West End. It would literally, you had to get your play through the censor to get it on in the West End, and that's in the 60s, up to the 60s. We've come a very long way indeed, thank goodness. For all these reasons, I believe that contemporary regulators can be powerful forces for good in the markets of today, and more important, the markets of tomorrow. And to achieve that, we must continue to enable, engage, and evolve. Now, I'd like to finish briefly where I began, with broadcasting, the magical, wonderful industry that I was privileged to be a part of starting over half a century ago. Next week, Ofcom will report on the future of public service media. These are the broadcasters who form the cornerstone of one of the most successful parts of our economy, the creative industries. They represent one of the great British success stories of the last 50 years. This is a story of boundless imagination, talent and flair. It is populated by chippies, grips, writers, designers, makeup, special effects, directors, actors who are in demand all over the world. Social mobility is not a surprise in our industry. Thanks to their work, British viewers and listeners enjoy a rich and varied diet of British-made programmes. British broadcasting has always been a happy, sometimes tricky mix of culture and commerce. It's where those two concepts collide, really, in British broadcasting over the years. But in recent years, the commercial end has witnessed enormous change. This commercial field is now a battleground for global giants who have the financial and technological firepower to overpower smaller domestic players. Rival entertainment competing for eyeballs and attention comes from everywhere, from TikTok on your phone to the streamers in your living room. YouTube has declared itself the new television. How can the likes of the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, 5, or indeed Sky compete? I learnt to my surprise recently that 80% of homes are now equipped with smart TVs. Well, regulation can help a bit. We're already making changes under the Media Act to level up the battlefield. These will mean streamers are subject to Ofcom standards in the same way as traditional channels. And those channels will remain easy, if not easier, to find. But there are some things that regulation, no matter how modern, cannot do. It cannot make people watch what they don't want to watch. The extraordinary choice we enjoy today is here to stay. If anything, it will only increase. Machine learning, large language models will allow media to become even more personalized, responsive, and interactive. New social platforms and content models will emerge. Video and audio will be available across an even wider range of personal and household devices. Many of the world's biggest companies will compete even harder for their slice of your time, our time. So public service broadcasters will have to fight even harder to stay relevant and valued. How do they do it? By doing what no one else can and no one else does. They can do it by harnessing their unrivaled heritage to create collective moments of essential national viewing. They can do it by using their national, regional, and local networks to reach people from all backgrounds in every part of the UK in a globalized world these days. They can do it by informing our society through world-class news and documentaries that report and reflect on our lives in the UK. As they do so, the standards to which they're held by Ofcom will continue to engender a level of trust among viewers that online and overseas platforms have never achieved. In the end, broadcasters can only do it making things that people want to watch, no matter what is available elsewhere. But it has to be available for them to make that choice. What if they fail? What if public service media should end up reaching almost nobody, losing its purpose or withering on the airwaves? Then I fear we would lose not only its economic benefits, but also its unique power to improve society. We would be left with, yes, another unregulated, commodified market. This time, the casualties would be trusted British news, drama, discussion, debate, a unique range of programs made by British producers with nothing on their minds other than to please the domestic audience. I don't believe that doomsday scenario will happen, but none of us can afford to be complacent. And to emphasize why it matters, I don't think I can do any better than finish with the words of Edward R. Murrow, the incomparable American broadcast journalist who covered World War II from London for American viewers and radio listeners, and then starred in a current affairs weekly show on CBS network in America. Murrow said of television, "This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, and even it can inspire, but it can only do so to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's nothing but wires and lights in a box." There is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, and indifference. This weapon of television could be useful. How prescient. Thank you very much indeed.
Wonderful, thank you. I've got plenty of time for questions. Can I see hands? And can I have name and affiliation? This lady right here.
Thank you, Lord Grade. Prof. Antoinette Haig. I am an alumni of the 2019 class of political economy here. I would love your commentary, please, Lord Grade, on the role of education, educators, family life, wider civil society in educating children about how the internet works, what is real, what is not real, digital literacy, those sorts of things. This is coming from my perspective, where actually by the time we get to kids viewing stuff that is harmful online, it's too late to help them. And what are we doing about teaching everyone how we behave in a world which is completely dominated by communications technology, not technology, communications technology. Thank you.
Well, I can't think of a more important subject. Media literacy, as it's kind of generically termed, becomes more and more crucial to enable users of this fabulous technology. And it is fabulous technology. I mean, it's amazing. To enable people to get the best out of it and distinguish between the dangerous bits, the misleading bits, the untrustworthy bits, and the bits that are you can put your faith in. And that must start at school. Parents today are not that, the kids are more media savvy than the parents. If my phone breaks, I get the kids or the grandchildren to fix it, So it starts with education. I cannot think of anything more important than schools actually picking up the baton and teaching children the good things, the positive stuff, and also to understand what to avoid and how to deal with stuff they don't want to see. Regulation will go quite a long way to doing this and reduce, we hope, over time, a lot of the harm. But I can't think of anything more important, and the younger the better. You go around a shopping mall on a Saturday, and you see kids of 3 in pushchairs with screens, and their thumbs are going like clappers. I mean, they need to understand what's out there. So you have any educators here, you have a huge role to go. I think the government understands this, and I think I'm not in the educational world, but I think there are moves to put some of this stuff on the curriculum at some point.
I'm sure.
I hope so.
Is a rebuttal allowed? Sorry, can I come back to that? No.
Yeah, you can. Just briefly though, please. Yep.
Oh, fine, thank you. Only that the EU AI Act stipulates that digital literacy is a requirement of the tech firms, but I haven't seen anything similar in Ofcom's Online Safety Act or similar measures. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's not for us to make government policy. I mean, Parliament will decide, on education policy, but I think it is important. I'd say, I'm 100% with you all the way.
Right there, please.
Thank you, Lord Grade. At the risk of using another E, that was very engaging. I've got more E's, and I was interested, in my affiliation as a civil servant, Joss Kelly.
Sorry, you are?
Joss Kelly, I work in the Department for Health on AI policy. Aside from AI, though, I'm wondering, and there are some synergies with the previous question, about a different E, which you didn't mention, education and enrichment. And I'm wondering, and perhaps I'm pining for a time when I wasn't even born, but the BBC Charter at one stage had that public educational element to it. And you spoke of choice in glowing terms, and I get that. But I thought one thing we've learnt, at least from an economics perspective, is actually more choice is not always good. Behavioural economics has certainly shown some evidence to that effect. And so I'm a little more sceptical, and I'm wondering instead whether there could be more that could be done, perhaps by the regulator, perhaps by government, and I'm interested in where you find the line here, to ensure that actually what so many of us, including young kids today, are exposed to is more enriching than perhaps the reality is.
Well, we can't, the genie's out the bottle. You know, we can't reduce choice now. It's too late. What we've got to do is to make sure that the public service media sector still carries that banner of educate, entertain, and inform in a different way. The problem is in the commercial sector, where, I mean, this will shock you, not shock you, it'll surprise you. When I was running the ITV network at the weekends, twice a year we would give over Sunday night prime time from 7 o'clock till 10:30 to a relay from Glyndebourne of an opera in prime time on ITV. Those are the good works we did in return for maintaining a monopoly in an analog world. Those days have gone, and the economic reality of the commercial sector of British broadcasting is it gets harder and harder to cross-subsidise those loss-leading, you know, Thames Television, blessed memory, Jeremy Isaac's brilliant series World at War, which is still running. You find it on the EPG. Is still running. That wouldn't get made today. That's what we're in danger of losing, which is why our public service media report next week, I hope, will be a bit of a canary in the mine to get people to focus their minds on the fact that that kind of investment, if we lose it, we'll never get it back. But the BBC is a separate issue. They're not in competition for revenue. That's a separate issue. It's the commercial sector of the PSB that is severely challenged, because the advertising, what used to be an advertiser, if you were Weetabix, you'd set aside a marketing budget of, I'm making the numbers up, £50 million this year to promote Weetabix. X amount would be print, X amount would be TV broadcasting. Today, that 50 million is just bought between online digital ads that you see on your TikTok or whatever, and a bit goes to online, goes to linear television, but the whole pot gets spread now, and that's a severe challenge. So we're asking a lot of the commercial public service broadcasters to keep investing in programs that don't show a return.
Please.
Thank you, Lord Grade. That was a fascinating lecture. James Johns, I'm the head of public policy for Workday and sometime visiting fellow at the Strand Group. It strikes me that there's potentially a bit of a dissonance in regulation in the UK, in that we've, for a long time, tightly regulated political advertising on linear television, to the extent that we still have this sort of slightly anachronistic party political broadcast as a sort of feature of television. And arguably that's a mechanism that has kept lots of money out of politics in a way that we haven't seen in the United States, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
We have been much slower and laxer at regulating political advertising in the online world, and we've seen quite a few sort of scandals emerge as a result of that. Recognizing this is perhaps an unfair question because you've already said you want to differentiate between kind of government policy and so on. Do you kind of see that dissonance, and do you think that's an area that needs intervention in the UK?
In the end, that's a policy decision for the politicians. I think the distinction, when an advertiser buys a slot on ITV, they're buying impact. For example, if Morrison's announced that they're reducing the price of petrol at their pumps by 2p a litre, all the other supermarkets have got to respond to that, and they've got to get the message out quickly. They can't do that online. So they all pile up on ITV saying 2.5p off at Sainsbury's or whatever. There's a sort of commercial battleground. The only thing that they need is impact, immediate impact, and that's the power of television, broadcast linear television. That's the distinction for political broadcasting between a party political broadcast on across all the channels and party political advertising. It doesn't have the impact that it does on broadcast. That will change over time, and maybe policy will change. As a side, but I can't help reflecting over my years. Television is supposed to have such power with people's lives, they've always reached for advertising as a solution, banning advertising or restricting advertising as a solution to access this or access that or whatever it is. But it's amazing when the same doesn't apply when they put a party political broadcaster. You would imagine if they applied the same power as they do to the normal ads, to their own ads, you're amazed that after they've done a party political, the whole nation that watched it isn't immediately going to vote for them because it's so powerful, this medium. The audience is not stupid. They know what they believe in. That's an aside. Sorry, a bit irrelevant to your question, but I'd like to get it off my chest.
Yes, down the front here, please.
Thank you, Lord Grade, for an excellent talk. I'm a liveryman of the stationers company. I believe you spoke at one of our events a few years back. But the connection here actually is that we obviously got our royal charter back in 1552 on the basis of censoring the press for Queen Mary at the time. So the censorship and regulation is something that I think there has been a long history of trying to find the right balance and especially adapting to the new technologies. But my question for you is actually on the topic of, and most of the discussion, so the questions so far have been about your role in regulating the content, but you also have the critical role of actually overseeing the infrastructure as well. And I wonder if you could comment on how you balance those two arguably very different objectives in terms of the, getting broadband out there, getting, cables, mobile networks, and that kind of stuff, as compared with the content and, what somebody's saying on YouTube.
It's a very, very different set of disciplines, and within Ofcom, each area that each territory that we regulate has got its own specialists. That's not to say people don't develop and move around within Ofcom over time, but essentially the specialists, the success of our rollout of laying out a policy which has enabled the laying down of fibre through, I think we're at about 70% now of homes and businesses passed, is phenomenal in a very short space of time. But we have to, within Ofcom, we have to specialise. The people who know about spectrum, know about spectrum more than anybody knows about spectrum. And the people who know about the telecoms infrastructure, the fixed sector, or even the mobile, they know their stuff inside out. So we're not siloed. We're not in any way, because there's so many of the companies we deal with. If you take Sky, for example, they are broadcasters, content creators, they're in telecoms, they're in broadband, they're now into sets, the Sky Glass It's very converged. So we have to make sure within Ofcom that we're all talking to each other, except you do need the basis of, to be credible in a sector, you've got to have serious expertise. In online safety, we've recruited a whole team of people, over 350 people. We've been recruiting over the last 2 or 3 years, and we've got people from the tech sector, from the voluntary sector, from government, from all kinds of areas, and then we've built up a real team of expertise, because we're dealing with the big tech companies. We need to have credibility. We need to know what we're talking about. That's how we deal with it, really.
Yes, please. Right there.
Thank you. Megan Stagman from Global Counsel. My question is perhaps a slightly unfair one, to give you warning. Your peer, Marcus Bockerink, was obviously removed from his post at the CMA earlier this year, supposedly for not paying due heed to growth. I think you've spoken a lot today about how Ofcom is tackling growth and deregulating where possible. But I guess my question is, how worried should we be about geopolitical headwinds, particularly from the US, basically exerting pressure on our government that then in terms would perhaps influence truly independent regulation?
Well, that's a good question. I am absolutely confident. I mean, the obvious area where you might perceive, because of the closeness between the President of the United States and the big owners of the big tech companies, you would expect them to have a lot of influence. I'm absolutely confident that this government, or any government in this country, in the interests of its subjects and citizens, would resist any pressure to relax regulation in that way. The downside is, the harm that's possible to be created is so great that no government would go there. I'm be really confident, particularly this government, because that's the government we have at the moment. I'm absolutely certain that there's not a hope that the government would bend to the knee of the tech companies and put pressure on Ofcom to relax its regulatory. I mean, it just couldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. I hope I'm right.
Yes, please. Right in the middle here. Sorry about that, Sean, but right in the middle here.
Sorry to point. I hate people in the Lords who point when they're speaking.
Harry Chatley.
Harry, hello. I didn't recognise you.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a two-part question, Lord Grey. One, you've touched on innovation and you touched upon AI. Is the provenance and trustworthiness of the online content is quite important in this world, because we all live in a world of content distribution. So what is Ofcom doing or planning to do to protect innovation within AI? So, because AI is here to stay, it is of great benefit, but it also poses challenges because it questions the trustworthiness of the content one ends up consuming. How is Ofcom planning to do that, or looking to address both the challenges, but also protecting that innovation in AI continues itself as well, rather than get over-regulated? And then on the...
Hold the second question. I'll give you the second question in a second. Let me answer that, because I won't remember the first question if I answer the second question. I'm quite encouraged. Before the general election, we asked, we didn't tell them, but we asked the heads of all the major news operations, Sky, ITN, and the BBC, and Radio News, to come in, because we've all had memes, we've all had internet stuff that's made up of, people. I had one today of Donald Trump at Wembley with Bobby Moore holding up the World Cup. It's so easy to fake anything today. And we asked them to exchange how they were going to deal with fake video or fake sound during the election campaign, and it was a really good meeting. And I was really fearful that there would be a horror during the election campaign, that some made up thing, with one of the leaders of the main political parties shoplifting in Tesco's, or on the closed circuit. You can imagine, the imagination runs right if you can create anything you want. And nothing got through. Their defences were, touch wood, impeccable. And I hope they will. They get better and better at spot. There are ways to spot the fake, but they have to take that moment when a piece of video or a story comes in on video. They have to take a moment to look at it and get behind the tech and examine it. So I'm quite confident about that. After that, I think the government is still thinking through, and it needs to take its time on this, as to what are the risks of AI, where is the harm, where is it likely to come from, and what should we do to restrict it or reduce it, or whatever. And that's a debate that's going on very, very live in the government at the moment, and we'll wait to see. All around the world, they're having the same conversations and concerns. We don't yet know what's the best way to deal with it. One of the important things comes back to the education question, which is, you've got to teach people that there are fakes out there, and to question, is this for real? Is this for real? So part of it is education. And secondly, we'll see what the government, with input from us, from tech companies, from everybody, is being consulted as to what is the right way to manage the AI revolution. And it really is a revolution. It's very exciting. I love it when you ask ChatGPT something and they give you the wrong answer, and you go back and you say you got that wrong, and they say, oh, thank you so much for pointing that out. You get a message back. It's hilarious. Sorry, Harry, your second question.
No, I've ended up using an app called Perplexity, which gives you sources you can check, in fact, and it's a fantastic, it uses ChatGPT, but it actually gives you sources, which you can then go and check yourself. And I think AI has great benefits, but it has dangers as well. My second question was what you started with, and you talked about telephone boxes as well, is innovation. So these tech companies have become almost monopolies. They weren't what were government companies, then were privatized, and then they, to break up the monopoly. So there was regulation that was introduced right at the beginning by Ofcom and everything else. But how does Ofcom now try to protect those UK companies that are innovators, too small to compete against these tech giants? What are you looking at right now as Ofcom in order to protect these new market entrants?
Well, I don't think that's within our remit. What we did recently, off our own bat, we did a study of the new cloud market, because there are some very dominant players in that. And as a result of our work, which was quite a considerable piece of work, I think one of the regulators, is it the CMA or the FCA, I can't remember which it was, is actually carrying out a very serious inquiry into the practices of the big cloud companies to see whether it's acting in the interests of consumers, whether there is real competition, or whether so eventually all companies get so big, eventually they overplay their hand, and we catch up with them. But in terms of innovation, I don't think the big tech companies are standing in the way of innovation. What they do is, if they see anything they think has really got potential, they step in and the founders make a fortune. That's the market. That's fine. But I don't think they're standing in the way, because the costs of innovation are so low today. In the old days, if you wanted to, you had to have a manufacturing, you had to have design, you had to have raw material. Today, it's all coding. You can sit in your garage and create a business that could be worth 10 trillion in a few years' time. And it's happening now. So there aren't any barriers to entry, I think, unlike other sectors. So I wouldn't be too worried about that.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name's Jo Clift. I'm the chair of a health regulator. I have quite a general question for you. For those of us who've been around for a little while, it's easy to feel negative about the state of our public discourse in the world, as Trump has been mentioned, or GB News, etc., etc. It's easy to feel that we're in a race to the bottom. But you seem to me to be quite a glass half full person.
I am.
So
yes.
I'm really interested to know what you think we can be positive about in terms of our public discourse at the moment.
I think the fact there is a discourse, we are getting a bit polarized. You know, you see that in the States. The polarization in the States is tangible. You know, we are. I don't think we're quite that polarized in this country yet, but we do have serious and impartial, trustworthy news. They make mistakes from time to time, but everybody does. And I think the public trust that. I'm very positive about the fact that people value BBC News, ITN, Sky News. They know that's the real thing, and they trust that. You know, when COVID happened, you know, the ratings of the public service news organisations soared. That's where the trusted information, and being a trusted brand is really, really, really important. And that's what we've got to hold on to and make sure it's sustainable. So I'm optimistic. I've made a pretty good living out of broadcasting, and my one rule always is don't take the public for mugs. They know the difference between a rubbish show and a really great show. You know, it's been proven time. As soon as you reach down, the public won't. They'll give it a try, but they won't stay with it. You know, you can't reach down. It doesn't work. It doesn't ever work, to be honest.
Down the front here, please. Down the front, Sean. Down the front here, please. Bobby.
Oh,
I am right, aren't I?
Thank you. Ian Beasley, long-term supporter of the Strand Group and its forerunners. Lord Great, when you sit down in the evening with your gin and tonic, and you once told me that you like
Negroni,
tonic, so I know I'm getting that right, and you think forward 5 or 10 years, where do you want to take Ofcom, why, and how are you going to do it?
Crikey, well, I'm in my last year as the chairman.
Giving you an extension.
Not my problem. What I hope to leave behind is an organisation that I inherited, which is in extraordinarily good health. It's a Rolls-Royce machine. It may not seem like it, but I can tell you it is. Unlike all the jobs I've ever had in the media, which is basically, I've been a media paramedic most of my life, arriving in situations where it all gone pear-shaped or it plateaued and it needed resuscitating. The job at Ofcom was not to mess it up and to make sure it continued on the path that it's continuing on. The key asset, I'm very optimistic that Ofcom can manage whatever is thrown at it in the next 10 years, because of our people, our recruitment. The recruitment in the organisation is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. I've never worked with so many bright people at every level in the company. It is really, it's just like, for me, it's just an extraordinary experience to be working with so many bright people. Some of them look as if, you know, they shouldn't be out at night. They're so young. But my goodness, the commitment, particularly in the online safety sector, where we've got a huge job to do, which is what attracted me to apply for the role in the first place. I've got grandchildren. My kids are fairly grown up now, but I've got grandchildren, and I worry about their online safety. And I got interested in the bill when it was first being mooted in the Lords, and then the vacancy appeared. And when I got into the organisation, I was lucky enough to be appointed. I got into the organisation. I could see in that one department alone, the online safety group, as it built up, these people are on a mission to reduce harm. That's what they're there to do, and that's what they come to work every day. And if you've got that caliber of people, that committed to whichever bit they're doing, and the ethos of the place is deregulation, competition, fairness, and so on, and consumer welfare, I would be confident that Ofcom could withstand whatever's thrown at it. We have everything from Spectrum to the Royal Mail. It's a huge portfolio, but we're able to attract really people want to have a career at Ofcom. It's so rewarding. I'm the dumbest person there, to be honest.
There was a hand up there, wasn't there? Yes. Yeah. A last question. Oh, look. Last week I had trouble because I wasn't wearing my glasses. Now I've got trouble because I am wearing my glasses. Bobby, would you please ask a question?
Thank you, John. But that was such a brilliant question and such a brilliant answer. But I'm going to kind of go back to something you said at the beginning there, Lord Grade, which is around soft power. And it'd be great to hear a bit more of your thinking and picking up on the point of optimism for the future, whether you have an optimistic picture of us realising the value of that soft power and what we can do to support that, sitting in an institution, in a university where I think similarly people can take for granted the enormous impact of that soft power and not protect it enough. So it'd be great to get both your views of what you expect in the future in really realising that soft power in a increasingly important global environment, and what you think we can do to bolster that and to protect it.
It's very hard to quantify. These days we live in a world where if you can't measure it, it has no value. I think somebody said, some great economist that I've never read, I think said that. And to a certain extent that applies to soft power. In my own world, one of the most effective pieces of soft power we have in this country is the BBC World Service, which even Nelson Mandela said it was the World Service that kept him informed and kept him sane in Robben Island. That's a pretty huge endorsement, and we know that goes on in many, many countries around the world. That's huge, and we must never lose that. We must never lose the BBC World. So it's got to evolve. It needs investment and so on. Where that comes from is not a decision for me. But our TV programs, our movie making, our talent, writers, novelists, painters in the arts, architects. We're some of the world's greatest architects in this country. That's all soft power. That all adds to the luster of the GB brand. And as long as people are being educated and want to be educated, and education is another soft power, as you described, the number of people that come here, get educated here, and then end up running their countries or their big organizations, they value that British education hugely. Huge soft power. Just because we can't actually measure it doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And we have to speak out for it and just go on reminding everybody in power in this country, whichever government, of the value of this soft power which we have. The biggest engine of soft power that we have is our language. Why are we so successful in the screen industry? We start with the language that most people speak. It's always embarrassing. You go to Germany, everybody speaks English. You go to Spain, you go to a lot of European countries, everybody speaks English. And it's embarrassing that we don't make the effort to speak it. But ours is the big, I think it's the Spanish, Chinese, Spanish and English are the biggest languages. And we're very lucky to have that language. So we've just got to champion it.
Love it. Right, one question there, and then That gentleman just in the centre there, that's it, who's had his hand up a while. So one right there, Sean. There we are.
Who's first?
Should I?
Over here, please.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for that. I'm Sarah. I'm a research associate here at King's. I have a quick question. Someone touched on, and you touched on, the importance of our impartial and trustworthy news. And I wonder what your views on how sometimes our broadcasters can fall into impartiality as balance, right? As like you have one member of this representative, one member of this, rather than impartiality as it was kind of perceived, like as, you know, accuracy and fairness and like this full range of views. And so what would your views be on that, and how can our broadcasters be more robust in this impartiality as it's meant to be rather than as balance? Thank you.
Two things. There's no such thing as impartiality. There aren't two sides to any argument. You could find 4, 5, 6, you know, take the Brexit debate, you know, there were all kinds of shades of views of that, of what Brexit should look like or what Remain should look like, and so on and so on. So it's a state of bliss that you strive. You've got to strive very hard to achieve it. It's very hard to achieve. But as long as the ethos of the organisation, backed up by regulation, some of it statutory, backed up by regulation, people are encouraged. You have to be sure that that's what they're striving to do. They don't always achieve it. One of the things that militates, so one person's opinion that something was partial, quite often I've had this argument with people. They said, well, did you see that bulletin last night? So-and-so said so-and-so. I said, yes. I said, that's not bias or impartial. That's a slip of the tongue. It's clumsy phrasing. You know, they're doing something live and the words haven't quite come out right. It wasn't scripted, and it's not a bias. Sometimes it can be bias. You get cross because it is bias. The other thing that militates against them achieving that state of bliss is the sheer pressure on reporters today. If you're a reporter on a newspaper, you're doing a blog, you're doing, you know, live updates online. You know, you work, if you're a journalist at the BBC or ITN or somewhere, you know, you're doing, we need you on the 6, we need you, can you do a piece for the 10? 5 o'clock, Radio 4 want you, Radio 5 want you, can you do, and you're doing, you don't get time to think and craft your words. Now, we're not going to be able to change that. But I think we've got to make allowances we've got to make a distinction between what is a slip up, a slip of the tongue, which can happen because of the pressure these people are under. You know, in the old days of Fleet Street, I started in Fleet Street. In the old days of Fleet Street newspapers, the people who worked on the Sunday Mirror or the Sunday Express only came in 2 days a week. You know, they had plenty of time to think. They got a full week's pay. And they'd work 2 days a week, you know, Friday, Saturday, get the paper ready, write the stuff, sub-edit, and do the layout, and sell the ads, and off we go. It isn't like that today. You do multiple outlets. News 24, Today Show want you, breakfast television wants you, and you're the expert, you're on the spot. You get no time to think. I really don't envy the journalists today, and I feel for them. They have a really stressful time, and they have to weigh every word very. Some are better at it than others, but they slip up. Sometimes it's bias, and that's where Ofcom comes in. So I think I have no doubt in my mind that ITN, BBC, Sky, the radio news providers, they come to work every day with the idea that they have to be impartial. They leave their opinions at the door. When they go to work. That's the most important thing. And they all do. There's no question, they all try.
And a last question here, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name's Charlie Hyde. I am attached to the Academy of Professional Development and King's College London's Dialogues programme. I have had a question that I could have jumped in at different times at I'm trying to link it into as much as possible, but the no time to think phrase you just said seems kind of perfect. We've talked a lot about the regulation of content, the choice of content, impartiality when it comes to content, but less about the actual format. I was attached to a few psychology research projects looking at loneliness and belonging. And one thing we found darkly ironic is we were trying to get this information out on a platform, Instagram, that we knew just the format of it, the short form scrolling, each micro decision that you make takes a toll on how creative, open, imaginative you can be. And just that literal structure contributes to anxiety, isolation, atomization. And I'm wondering if that's come up at all in discussions at Ofcom, particularly because it's been the fastest method to gain advertising revenue, that compared to, as you were describing, the previous broadcast generation, because it literally depends on someone wanting something slightly random. They, not consciously, but that's the mechanism.
Have you got any examples
of
the sort of things you're talking about?
Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts. Every time you swipe, the same network lights up in the brain as when you pull a slot machine, but everything else that is to do with imagination shuts down. And in the context of,
I see what you're getting at.
For example,
yeah. Well, the way the tech companies work, if I look something up on TikTok or YouTube or whatever, I want to. One of my passions is sailing. You know, I'd like to see the famous race in 2023 between Ben Ainsley and somebody. You know, and I'll watch it, and for the next 3 years of my life, I'm getting fed sailing. Anything remotely to do with sailing hits my screen. That's kind of what you're talking about, is it? It's the algorithms.
Yes, it's more about the collective micro decisions between every change. 'Cause it takes a toll that isn't immediately conscious, but it shuts down temporarily physiological processes.
Well,
reset anxiety.
You're being fed your known choices. You're not being fed anything that might be what we used to call accidental learning or accidental interest. Oh, that looks. How often do you look in the old days? Look across a magazine rack looking for. Oh, that looks interesting. You had no intention of buying it, but you say, "Oh, that looks interesting. I'm going on a train journey. I'll buy that magazine." It's restricting your imagination. Is what you're saying, I think.
Yes, and it's important in the context of, for example, the mental health epidemic.
Certainly. Well, the acceptance and the understanding of mental health issues has grown exponentially in my lifetime. I mean, the old days, pull yourself together. That was kind of basically the treatment that was prescribed. But these days, I think we're much more sensitive and alert. We haven't got to causes that well yet, and what contribution the online world is doing to feed and hurt people's mental health is something that will take good few years for people like yourself to study and research with real data and come up with some answers. But it's an important topic. But it's very good that in the UK we're much more open. America was, when I worked in Hollywood for a few years, way back in the 80s, and everybody had at least 2 shrinks and 3 psychics, and it was, every dinner party discussion or cocktail party discussion was about, what your shrink was saying or whatever, You never heard that in polite society in the UK, but I think we're much more open today, and that's a good thing because it enables us to recognise and help people who are struggling.
Well, I thought that was really quite wonderful. I thought it was hard, soft, a little pessimism.
No.
Overall optimistic.
Yeah.
I'm going to say reasonable, humane, educative, informative. This is like public service broadcasting, isn't it? Funny that. Well, that brings us to an end, our season, this particular event. I thought that was wonderful. You're all invited for a drink. It's just in the arcade, just beyond those doors. And would you join me in thanking Lord Grade?
Thank you very much.